Welcome to the 129th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's podium. For over a century, this stage has united visionaries and leaders from politics, business, community, and the arts to share insights on the most pressing issues of our time. And with Canada in a pivotal moment, it's more important than ever that we come together.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. So I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon again, members and guests, and welcome to those joining us online. I'm Shazanne Chu, President, Canadian Club Toronto, and your host for today's program. In our 129th season, Canadian Club Toronto continues to serve as Canada's podium, a place where leaders, decision makers, and engaged citizens come together to exchange ideas and consider the issues shaping our shared future. Our events are made possible through the generosity of our sponsors, and today's event is proudly sponsored by Borden Ladner Gervais LLP and McCarthy Tetrault LLP. Thank you both for your commitment to today's important conversation. We are also grateful to our season sponsors, the Canadian Bankers Association and Air Canada, and Canadian Club Toronto is proud to sponsor with Canada's Forest Trust Corporation for the third consecutive year as our exclusive nature partner. Now, I know that this is a deeply curious group, so throughout today's discussion, if you have questions, please jot them down on the Q&A cards at your tables and raise your hand when you finish, and a member of our team will come and pick them up for our moderator. For those joining online, please click the Submit a Question button on your screen, and our team will also gather those questions. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists and moderator. Cynthia Hansen, Executive Vice President and President, Gas Transmission, Midstream, Enbridge. Cynthia leads Enbridge's natural gas pipeline and midstream business across North America. With more than 25 years at Enbridge, she brings deep industry expertise and has been recognized among Canada's most powerful women for her leadership and commitment to inclusion. Welcome. Justin Napoleon, Board Director, Still Niseket Indigenous Alliance Limited Partnership. A former Chief Counselor of the Saulteaux First Nation, Justin helped secure Indigenous ownership in the Coastal GasLink pipeline, a first-of-its-kind partnership in Canada. He continues to champion economic reconciliation through his work in industry and community development. Elizabeth Wademan, President and CEO, Canada Development Investment Corporation, CDEV. CDEV is a federal crown corporation acting as the financial and commercial trusted advisor to the Government of Canada and responsible for over $75 billion of federal assets through the CDEV group of companies, which include Trans Mountain Corporation, Canada Growth Fund, and Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation. Elizabeth brings to CEDAW 25 years of experience in the financial sector as a former senior investment banker and capital markets executive. And Cherie Bryant, partner and national leader, Indigenous Law, Borden Ladner Gervais LLP. Cherie advises Indigenous nations, governments, and corporations on energy and infrastructure projects across Canada. A director of Canadian Club Toronto, she is recognized for building strong partnerships that advance reconciliation and shared prosperity. Cherie and panel, Canada's podium is yours.
Okay, so great to be here, and I feel like I have to turn my chair a little bit so I can see you guys. But this is so wonderful. It's so nice to see all of you. And I want to say the first thing I want to do is really acknowledge all of the Indigenous nations and voices that I see in the room. I haven't been able to see all of you, but I know you're here. And I want to say that each of you are champions for the special work that you do. I also want to pay special recognition to the treaty territory where we gather today and acknowledge the chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Chief Claire Salt, and I see also former Chief Larry Salt. I want to acknowledge both of you here today, so thank you for coming. Now, when I did the very first loan guarantee for an energy project in Ontario, we were solving for a different issue, a deeper issue, a systemic issue, one that is directly tied back to the Indian Act. And it's that Indian Act that still governs about 600 First Nations across the country. Today, I think we're solving for multiple issues at the same time. And it's truly exciting, but sorely needed. Some people call it nation building, others call it access to capital or wealth creation. More recently, people call it reconciliation. But whatever you call it, it's economy building. And it's so critical to the collective success for all of Canada. So for all the financing industry representatives in the room, I want to say pay close attention because you are bearing witness to an emerging industry and a new chapter that I like to call Indigenous participation in capital markets. And we need your interest and attention. So, this is just an absolute incredible opportunity to bring this esteemed panel to you today and to talk to you at Canada's podium. I joined the board for the Canadian Club of Toronto back in 2021. The whole objective was to bring these types of policy discussions. And so this is very special to me and really look forward for everybody to hear from this panel and hear about the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program and the discussion that we're going to have here. So we've got about 45 minutes. I've got three main themes that I want to cover. I've got questions for each of you in those, so we'll get right into it. But I'm going to start first with the why and really talk about sort of, how did this deal come about? I'm going to start with you, Justin, and sort of ask you for your thinking on this transaction, if you can sort of share with us your story about how this got off the ground.
Sure. It was a long time in the making, I will say that. It's an older asset that's been in the territories where the nations purchased the equity for decades. And it's always been talked about and discussed by the leaders of the nations that they would like, ownership in something that resides in their territory and has for so long. And there was never an appetite for it. For years, there was never an appetite for it. And then Emily Black, Cynthia, and Enbridge's team brought forward a proposal to the group of nations, and it worked out really well. So it brought something that was needed for decades to the nations to make sure that they get compensated for the resources that are leaving their territories. So knowing that, Enbridge brought forward a deal that was flexible, that was willing to meet the nations where they were, and approaching it with patience. Each nation's set up differently. They have different economic levels of where they are. So I think when you approach nations, you have to approach them, with flexibility, because some nations are established and have giant economic divisions where it's easy for them to look at and take part in deals like this. Some nations remote, they might not have those opportunities. So I think it's super important to know the nations that you're approaching for these opportunities and meeting them where they're at and supporting them if you really want them to be a partner.
Okay. So we heard in the intro 38 First Nations, but so everybody was interested, obviously, to do this.
There was a few nations that decided not to participate, but the vast majority were super excited, and we're happy to be involved in the project, obviously after doing due diligence and negotiations and making sure that the project fit their needs for their communities.
Okay, great. And so Cynthia, maybe you can talk about it from the Enbridge perspective, obviously an existing asset. Were you expecting a call? Was this a surprise? Or maybe you can just take us to that context.
Sure, Cherie. First of all, let me just thank you for facilitating this, and a big thanks to Shazan and the Canadian Club for hosting this very important conversation today. And as you say, potentially, and it is nation building. So as Justin mentioned, this is not a new idea. I mean, we were listening and we heard this from the nations that they wanted to participate. What I would say is there wasn't really a financial structure in place when we first started having these conversations. But back in, it really kind of started in 2022 when the Alberta government came out with their Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And that's when we, at that time, were able to structure a deal with 23 Indigenous nations and Métis in Alberta for them to invest in 7 existing oil pipelines where it was a $1.12 billion deal. They bought 11.57%. So that gave us that first structure. So, it was something that we then, at the same time in 2022, we had introduced across our organization our Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan. So we were committed to moving forward with trying to promote that opportunity for equity participation. So we looked across our assets, and these BC assets popped up. So as Justin noted, we've been there for 7 decades. We had these relationships. We knew the nations were interested. And then we had this structure, or the idea of a structure. Now we had to go forward and do some work with the federal government to, really figure out what that would look like and how we could facilitate that. But it was something that, was both an opportunity for Enbridge to really make sure we were deepening our connections with the communities and providing that opportunity for Indigenous partners to fully participate at that equity level. It's something that obviously we're proud of. We've done 4 deals like this in the last 3 years, and we'll continue to look for those really meaningful opportunities across our system for equity participation.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, obviously not easy when you're thinking about bringing multiple communities into a transaction for an existing asset. I mean, I sort of look at the market and think that traditionally we've seen transactions spur on the basis of a consultation obligation. In this case, it's the Alberta program that had really triggered the interest.
Well, yeah, and we saw other programs. I mean, once that program started to demonstrate it was successful, you had other governments start to lean in and think about how that would happen. We now have similar opportunities in other provinces, and of course, the federal program that was announced in 2024.
All right, so maybe that leads perfectly over to you, Elizabeth, thinking about 2024. Maybe you can take us back to that time and sort of provide background on how you see this transaction, how it got together.
Sure. Well, thank you. And first off, thank you very much, Cherie, for moderating this important conversation. Jan, thank you for the wonderful land acknowledgement, which, I really think starts us off in a good way for this conversation. So incredibly, it was a year and a half ago, exactly here, coincidentally here at the Sheraton, that the initial Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program was announced. And it was announced in Budget 2024, and FNMPC conference was taking place actually that day. So it's quite fortuitous to be back here 18 months later with what I think is a very transformative transaction for 38 nations. But what I'd like to do is maybe take a step back.
Sure.
Because it did come about very quickly, but what enabled that was a combination of a number of factors. And as we've talked about, it was announced in Budget 2024 in April, and we knew that this was a transformational program for Canada, for First Nations. And when we thought about that opportunity set at CDEV, we also thought we were positioned very, very well to lean in and to be able to drive forward this program. And maybe for a bit of background on CDEV, and thank you for the remarks that sort of set the stage. We're a federal crown corporation. We've been around for 43 years, and we're responsible for over $75 billion of assets and mandate. And I think the one thing that we're really known for is our financial and commercial expertise. And so we have a long track record of setting up commercial programs and financial programs that execute on policy objectives from the government on pretty short notice. At Canada Growth Fund, I recognize Yannick is here as CEO. We turned that around very quickly, and we also set up the Canada Enterprise Emergency Funding Corporation to support large employers during COVID. And why is this important for CILGC? I think we were a trusted partner, recognizing that moving at the speed of business was critical to get this long-awaited program going. But I think the interesting dynamic from our end was this concept of moving at the speed of trust with nations. And so I think we were well positioned, but we also recognized this was a high stakes, and there were high expectations, and also how eyes would really be on that first transaction. So it came about quickly, thanks to 10 years of work to actually get, I think, the program launched, and many conversations across Canada speaking about how this is an important lever to access Indigenous capital. But it also really came about from the work that Enbridge did, the years of work that you've done in the communities and some of the precedents that you've set. And then, frankly, it was an incredible consortium with leaders who are very, very organized, who really helped bring that together at Stone Lasac 8. And so when we were approached on this transaction, it's a wonderful story because we had not even incorporated yet. We got announced in April 2024. We're not incorporated until December, but very quickly. And there was knocking on our door. And it was Stone Lasac 8. It was Justin, it was Chief Jimmy saying, we really want to talk to you. We have a very ambitious agenda, and we have a great opportunity, and we'd like to talk to the federal partners about this. And for us, this transaction really, really resonated. It was, I'd say, a bit of a poster child in terms of actually looking at the asset. And you talked a little bit about that. This was an asset that was already built. This is an asset where the communities, it was clear on who the communities were. This is a regulated asset. The risks were right in line with the profile of the mandate, and there was really solid revenue associated with it. So, certainly this transaction was compelling. And as we met with Stone Lasac 8 and recognized, frankly, the alignment within the communities and the tremendous support that Enbridge had also helped provide to make sure that the right skills were around the table to support the work that Stone Lasac 8 was looking at, it became clear that this was quite a compelling opportunity to benefit, 38 plus nations, be the largest Indigenous economic participation done in Canada, and frankly, one of the largest ever done in North America. And so, we were able to respond fairly quickly. We have financial and commercial expertise within CDEV, so we were able to really use our internalized expertise, and then we were augmenting that with getting, top financial and legal advisors who could really bring, I think, the best conversation points to the table to help us, result in an optimized transaction. And so when I look at this transaction, for me, I think we're immensely proud. We do think that it sets a high watermark for transactions to come. We also felt it critically important that the first transaction would have a lot of eyes on it. We had seen a large provincial transaction that was a failed transaction in the months preceding. And so for us, making sure that this was ironclad and really thoughtfully put together was critically important to set the program off on the right stage. So we did have a negotiated term sheet that was presented to us, and we were able to turn that around very quickly with the Minister of Finance, which is the only authority that we require, and get this first transaction done by June of 2025. So it was fast, but thanks to the work of our partners and a lot of the work from Indigenous nations who contributed to this conversation, which led us to be able to launch the program.
Amazing. Okay, I want to go back to the reference to trust, because I think that is so important, and obviously want so much at stake, all eyes being on you, the opportunity to create trust, to give trust to the market in terms of setting the standard for this transaction, the size of the capital. So really want to commend you on that, and I agree. I mean, I think this is exactly where your organization is so well placed to establish that trust and establish that excitement and interest within the market. So well done. I want to go to Justin now. I'm thinking about back to this idea of 38 First Nations having to come together, and a financing. You mentioned, Cynthia, like what's going to be the structure. 38 nations, different treaties, or all under Treaty 8. Maybe you can talk about like just how you actually got the voices around the table.
So I think the key to this deal was the fact that Enbridge let the nations lead it on their end. They provided capacity and support, but they let them self-determine. So the 5 regions that the pipeline crosses through, each one had their own representatives. And they were elected and appointed by the respective nations as a group in that territory, which then gives you independence and led the nations to feel that they were guiding their own path on this deal. And credit to CDEV for meeting us where we were too, and I just got to give your team credit. They worked fast and they worked professionally with us. But that was key, was getting the right people and letting the nations pick them. And then also having a steering committee, which was also nation selected and nation led. And then patience to let the nations take the time they needed to evaluate the deal, to evaluate the economics of it, and to reach out to their communities. I did lots of community meetings explaining the deal with the nations in my territory. I think they find a little bit more comfort when it's coming from somebody that's part of the community. So there was lots of community engagement, lots of time taken to ensure that it was the right deal for the nations. And I think at the end of the day, we got a deal that works for the nations, and it works for Enbridge, and it worked for Canada. And I think it sets a great precedent on the quality of deals that nations are going to be looking for moving forward. Nations are pretty risk averse, with a lot of, takes time to build trust and relationship with nations. My nation is big on relationships. If you say you're a partner, lots comes with that. Engagement in community, really being part of the community and understanding what's important. And I think Enbridge, in their approach on this, respected that and understood it, and I think that led to a large part of why we were successful.
That's great, but lots of committee meetings, as you say, right? And over a 2-year period. And
Yeah.
so would you recommend that structure then for
I
just
would
sort of thoughts on the model?
Yeah, I would recommend the model and the structure. I think it can be done quicker. A lot of the time frame was the development of process with the loan guarantee program and everything else. So I think there's room for improvement on the time frame. But I do think it's a good structure that gives the nations control and the ability to evaluate it on their own so that they feel comfortable making the step forward.
That's great. Now I'm going to go to you, Cynthia, for the difficult question of the fact that I'm sure there were issues that came up along the transaction timeline. We started to talk about it 2 years, and I imagine lots of issues that had to get solved along the way. Can you share some of that insight?
Sure.
Or what can you share?
No. We can share. A lot of us were in it together. We were supported by the partners in this. What I would say is, I think both Elizabeth and Justin have talked about this. First of all, we had to come up with a structure. And because this, we did have the previous reference in Alberta, but things are different, and we had to look at what was going to work for that. We're obviously regulated, so we had to have something that was going to work in that space. We obviously, too, wanted something that, as Justin said, worked for the Indigenous communities, which are unique and different, so there was flexibility in that. And then we also had our other stakeholders, our shippers, the ones that provide the funding for that. So we had to go in and come up with a structure. The other thing with our structure is these assets that we've operated have gone through a lot of different ownership structures over the years, right? So we had to do some cleanup work just to come up with a vehicle and a structure that would allow us to have that participation. So there was a lot of that structuring stuff done. And then, as was noted, when we first started having these conversations, there was no federal loan program. And, Enbridge, with a lot of assistance from our Indigenous partners, we really lobbied hard to get that structure in place, and then finally worked with Elizabeth, the team there, to move through that. So there was a lot of time and attention just spent on trying to figure out how to effectively deliver this. Now, as was mentioned, all of this had to be done in a way that we had the trust, and we continued to build on those relationships. So that was really important to us, and obviously I think that allowed us to eventually get to a really successful place. And I think as we look to what the opportunity for the future is, there's opportunities, as Justin said, to use this as a template for the future. Obviously, we're going to need even more focus and attention on these loan guarantee programs. That's so critical for the nations to be able to participate in an equity way. That stability, having the federal government or provincial government come in, provides that stability that you need. It allows the financing of the transaction, the confidence of the markets to move that forward. As was mentioned, the nations have to have access to transaction cost support so that they can fully participate at an equal level. So that requires them to have advice from lawyers and accountants and bankers and the rest of that, so having that. And then our CEO, Greg Ebel, was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. It's really critically important for us to have some stability when it comes to the policies, too. So as we're looking to how we're going to continue to build out Canada and ensure that we have this opportunity, a number of the key CEOs in the energy space, 37 of them, have signed a letter providing that advice. And one of those key pillars is to ensure that we can have that full active participation in the nation-building work from our Indigenous partners. And that requires that level of coordination. So yeah, the team did an amazing job. I can't thank the Enbridge team members and our other team members enough. They just, whatever came up, there were issues that came up all the time. They were just committed to doing the right thing because they knew we were doing this for the right reason.
All right, and so financial advisors, legal advisors, all sorts of corporate due diligence, perhaps. I'm thinking about the topic of due diligence here that had to be assembled, and looking to you, Elizabeth, around just sort of, what needs to get pulled together to do a loan guarantee. I'll tell you, there are several projects probably in this room, future applicants or existing applicants, and they're all sort of looking to you to hear about how can they do their loan guarantees, and so maybe you can share some of that.
Sure, and I think it's a very important question, and I want to tie back to the comment Justin made around this is around self-determination of the nations. So this is nations coming forward around investable opportunities, and I really want to reiterate that. For me, that self-determination piece is fundamental. The way we consider applications as a lender would really be through the lens of a traditional sort of commercial lending relationship. So that would involve sort of robust due diligence from our end, and thinking around, all the sort of the risk profile associated with guaranteeing a loan. So, from our end, we would be very involved in looking at sort of the risk profile. So looking at, operating risks, if there's pre-construction risks or construction risks, and understanding that and understanding how that would impact ability to service debt, and looking at cash flow profile. I think one really interesting opportunity to find efficiencies in the system is our ability to leverage diligence already done by the nations or by commercial lenders, or for that matter, some of our provincial counterparts. So I think we're not looking to duplicate, in many instances, due diligence that has helped those stakeholders in their diligence. We can often do a top-up or sort of piggyback on that due diligence, but it is a robust process, as you can probably appreciate, given this is a lending relationship.
Yeah. No, I expect that. And just maybe thinking back to you, Justin, and this whole due diligence process, were there different risks along the way that the community was particularly sensitive to?
I would say a big one was political risk. There was concerns from some leadership. What are the impacts on the nation in supporting this equity deal? As stewards of the land, does this fit within what we see as being the right way to invest? And I think that was one commonly heard from a lot of leadership. And I think the discussions then that kind of focused around that topic were pretty important at the community level. And those community meetings were super important to get that feedback from your members. Leadership generally don't make these big kind of moves like this without community support. So the fact that we had 38 come forward and willingly put their names on this deal shows that there was solid community support for it, and that it did meet a lot of those principles in terms of protecting the environment, utilizing resources to the maximum effect. So I think.
Okay. Well, you're making me think about other transactions that I've been involved in, and sort of risk assessment and the whole due diligence piece, and getting that community buy-in, like really not easy.
No.
And there's sometimes thinking of an Enbridge project, the asset may not be something that the communities are used to thinking of being owners in, right? And thinking about other projects that Ontario may be considering. We see potential nuclear projects, nuclear projects listed on the major projects list. What sort of thoughts do you have around trying to build that consensus within the community to get community support around projects that they may have never considered being owners in? How do we own nuclear? How do we own oil and gas?
I like to say, I have a little saying I like. It's
Sure.
Engage early, engage often, and engage respectfully. Lots of times it's not a fear of the unknown, I think, is a big part of why communities might kind of shy away from certain things. And some of the remote communities might not know the risks and dangers, or really lots of the communities might not. I don't know enough about nuclear. So I think education, patience, and engagement with the communities is so key. Going out to them, meeting them where they are, sitting down with their members and discussing, being open and honest and transparent about risks, complications that may arise, detrimental effects that may come. Nations want to know, they want to be treated in an honest and transparent manner. I think that's the best way you can approach them.
All right, you're making me think of something else that I'm curious about. The communities themselves, did they carry out that engagement on their own, or did the advisors carry out that engagement?
It was led by the transaction committee, so myself and the transaction committee would reach out to the communities. And given we're responsible for each region, I had the nations in Treaty 8 were my nations that I engaged with, and I had good relationships with all of them. So I just put the offer out there openly. If you guys ever want me to come speak to your members, discuss this deal, I'm more than happy to. A few of them took me up on it. And I think every one of those meetings was foundational in getting the nation support to continue this transaction.
Okay, not an easy thing to do by any means.
You take a little bit of risk when you go in there speaking on this stuff, especially as like a former leader. You do take a lot of risk going out there and just voicing support for something that historically hasn't been done before.
All right, so I think we talked about the why and how this has come to the forefront here. We talked about how in terms of the structure and all the due diligence and how we've got to have a compelling project to bring forward. I want to sort of now turn to thinking about like what's next in terms of how do we get more deals in this space, right? You've got an eager audience here, really excited to understand what their roles are going to be in this future market that we think about. Just trying to understand different ways that different players can participate and sort of thinking about how are we going to get Canada to make more deals in this space. Maybe I'll start with you, Elizabeth. What do you sort of see as what's next for the CILGP?
Yes, so obviously we think about this every day, and we're trying to push the ball down the field. And I'm very encouraged by the level of engagement and conversation around this as an important tool to support Indigenous nations' access to capital. So I'm a data person, so I'll share with you some data. We have met over 225 nations. We have identified 47 opportunities across Canada, which include First Nations, Inuit, and Métis opportunities. Half of those are now in formal application, and 10 of them are in sort of more deeper due diligence, representing over $3 billion of potential loan guarantees. We do think that this is just scratching the surface in terms of the opportunity set. And we are very keen to work with our provincial partners. And a big part of the launching of CILGC was spending time and having a bit of a listening tour with our provincial counterparts. And Alberta, as Cynthia mentioned, Saskatchewan and Ontario do have programs that are up and running. And we wanted to learn from their experience and some of their best practices as it informs how we think about the program and maximizing the opportunity set within Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. So I think there's a real opportunity to be collaborative with those provincial counterparts, to stack with them. And I think a big piece around the storytelling, the talking about this transaction and storytelling in the communities, I think is very important from our understanding of the knowledge within the communities. And so I think we think quite seriously around what the right engagement strategy is on a national level to make sure particularly underserved or nations with less capacity internally can still benefit from the program and understand the program. And I think you use the word meet nations where they are. And there's a range from what we've seen in terms of the level of sophistication or the level of internal capability to be able to access the program. So I think that there's a big learning piece that we are continuing to work on, and I'm also very keen to announce a few more transactions going into next year to continue and build on the momentum that we have from our first deal. And we're looking to partners here, right? I think, and I will fully acknowledge and appreciate, thank you, that the chiefs from Ontario who are here and Indigenous representation from Indigenous nations here in Ontario. We're very keen to partner with the Ontario program, and we're very keen to do transactions right here in Ontario and obviously across the country.
All right. Well, there's a lot of programs lining up. There's a lot of projects lining up. So this is going to be great. All right, now over to you, Justin, trying to think about what's next. What do you see? I mean, you've closed the deal, and where do you see?
I think sky's the limit, given our global kind of macro environment we're in right now. I think Canada investing in itself is only going to grow. And I think our economic independence is of key importance. So I think you're going to see just more and more of these kind of nation-building projects that involve the First Nations as proponents in it, participants. And I see lots of opportunity on newly constructed projects in approaching them. I've kind of been in on a couple deals where you set up things as options upon completion to become an equity owner. Because again, some nations don't have the economic means to find the financing or the risk of cash calls or dilution if you invest up front on a project, say. So I think that idea of an option in service when the asset is generating money is a supreme benefit to the nations who might not have the ability to obtain the financing that they would need. So I see expansions on our current asset are planned in the future, so I see nation participation in that. I see, as we expand into renewables and green energy, I think nations will be have a big involvement in that process. I know my nation itself is looking into wind farms and being involved in calls to power. I think Indigenous participation in projects is going to be wide and varied and right across the country.
All right. Now, Cynthia, over to you as a public company. How do you sort of see like what's next and what are you thinking?
Yeah, so from a public company point of view, I think, as was mentioned, the sky's the limit, but we do need to support our Indigenous partners and allow them to fully participate at that equity level. You know, we are in an incredible place in Canada right now, and we can continue to really build the infrastructure that we need to become dominant in some areas like energy dominance. That is going to require that full participation of the various Indigenous partners that we have. So looking at that, the programs need to expand. We need to look at how we can support them going forward. We're going to need to, again, support them not just with the funding opportunities for that financing that are an initial opportunity where it's an existing asset or a new build, but it is all of the transaction costs covering that too, right? And that stability that we need from the overall policy point of view. I think that together we can have that path to success, but we really do need to make sure the Indigenous participants are full partners.
And you sort of say, when you finish the transaction, that's just the deal. Now the relationship really kicks off. Right?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, for this particular deal, we've been in those communities for over 70 years. We're going to be there for another 70 years. Now we want to create an opportunity for us to have more transparent conversations, for there to be continued opportunities to participate in future growth, making sure that we're taking that input from our Indigenous partners into how we need to be successful in the future. This is just a foundation for future success.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, so we just have a few more minutes left. I did get a couple of questions from the floor, so we could switch over to that. The first one here, is there funding within the loan guarantee program to support capacity, to support legal fees and other costs of the nations in order to prepare nations to enter the program? Maybe that's over to you, obviously, Elizabeth.
Yes. So that's a great question. And yes, there is. And that capacity funding piece right now is administered through Natural Resources Canada. And there is absolutely, that capacity funding available. I think it's really around sort of investment analysis and due diligence to help support nations. So, I think that's an important piece. I think another important piece, as I think about sort of capacity funding, is the proponents taking on and helping around the costs associated with getting the right support from nations. So I would also think that there is a real opportunity there as well, in addition to the funding that Natural Resource Canada is currently providing.
All right, thank you for that. The next question is, this initiative is focused on oil and gas. What about other collaborative development of green energy projects? So another question over to you, Elizabeth. Maybe you could talk about the types of projects that you're willing to consider for loan guarantees.
Sure. And I think it's important to speak about the evolution of the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. So when it was originally launched in April 2024, the wallet was $5 billion, and it was focused on natural resources and energy. 3 months later, that size was doubled to $10 billion wallet and really open to effectively all sectors, which really opens the opportunity set for Canada. So right now, we are in discussions across a range of different industries, and we are looking, to be active across a range of industries. This is not in our minds. Yes, there's certain assets that are very well suited, like this, like the Enbridge asset, but I think there's a real wider set of opportunities now that we have flexibility within our mandate to really pursue opportunities across the spectrum, across Canada, therefore, and across many different industries. So a much broader opportunity set.
Okay, fantastic. I just got 2 questions, so I'm going to close off. But, I want to say I've always sort of thought about loan guarantee as kind of an elegant solution to what can be a really complicated problem, right? Like if you're sort of thinking about what are we trying to solve for, right? But I think it's the right solution for the time now, because we need to create confidence, as you say, Cynthia, in the markets, and we need to get the attention of the financing space. And I think, for so long, people have not really understood, how Indigenous communities are operating. We're under different jurisdictions. And, just all that uncertainty has, in so many ways, stalled all the development that could happen within our Indigenous communities. So, I look at loan guarantees as trust building. I think Canada, needed to make that first move. But we can't have loan guarantees as the only solution to what is a larger issue around building sustainable communities for all Indigenous communities across the country. And so I think, the idea is that this becomes an incredible catalyst. I want to acknowledge how amazing it is that this has already come to fruition, and how many applications you have in the queue. So we're going to see so much more in this space. But my hope is that this, really starts to catalyze all sorts of other investment in the capital markets, and companies come forward and, try to find ways to bring that capital to Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities come forward and bring their ideas and their businesses. And, so I sort of see all of this as part of a much bigger ecosystem as all the work that we've been trying to do. And so I really want to congratulate all of you for bringing this incredible story to the front. Maybe we start from the west, and we're going to work our way across Canada in terms of these projects. We'll wait to hear the next announcements. Who knows where those will be. But thank you so much, Justin, for bringing your story as a former chief. Very important story and very important objective to make sure that your community has buy-in on these investments. And thank you to Enbridge for stepping up, for having a reconciliation action plan. I know some of your directors and do hear about how important these issues are. So really appreciate that you guys have all been able to make this happen.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, so nice to have you here and be a part of this transformation. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Cherie, for leading such a thoughtful and engaging discussion. And Cynthia, Justin, and Elizabeth, thank you for sharing your insights and your leadership in advancing Indigenous economic participation in Canada's energy and infrastructure sectors. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, BLG and McCarthy Tetrad, again for making today's event possible. And as always, a special thank you to our AV partner, VVC Live, for their excellent production support. Another round of applause to everyone. Thank you. Before we close, please mark your calendars for some upcoming events. On October 29th, we welcome Mirko Bibic, President and CEO of Bell Canada. On November 10th, we host Her Worship, Olivia Chow, Mayor of Toronto. And on November 13th, we launch a new series, Canada's Next Move, exploring the bold actions needed to drive Canada's economy forward. This inaugural luncheon will explore the economic imperatives of our future. We hope to see you there. Thank you again for being with us today, both in person and online. We hope you'll continue the conversation as we build more inclusive and prosperous Canada together. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.